to the MOOC course on Public Financial Administration. Dear learners, today's class we are going to deal with Introduction to Public Finance. I am Dr. Shobhana Karthikeyan, Assistant Professor, Department of Economics, Madras Christian College, Chennai, and I will be your instructor for this half an hour's class. So, what are the learning goals for today? So, once this class is done, you should be able to understand what is the need for the public sector, what exactly is the public sector, why can't the economy be just left to the private actors and agents, why is the study of public financial administration important, and how does the circular flow in the economy actually happen, and what are the functions of public policy. The functions of public policy largely can be divided into four distinct functions. One is the allocation function, the distribution function, the stabilization function, and the coordination of the budget function. So, once we complete all this, we will be entirely recapping it, and then I will take questions if any. So, before we even begin, I would actually suggest you to put this on mute once I have given you a little activity for a minute. So, the activity is like this. Give examples of 10, or if not 10, maybe 3 or 4 government goods and services that are reached out to you by your government, and can you also think a minute and realize and understand how the goods and services are distributed to the citizens. So, this is a small activity. So, maybe you can pause the video for a while and think and just write down a couple of them. So, if you will see, we are faced with lots of public goods and services around us. So, to just get the flow moving on, I have added an examples of few public goods here. One, the public distribution system takes care of food grains, pulses that are reached out to the nearby ration shops which people buy. The next one is if people have ailments in their bodies, heart surgeries, dental surgeries are done in the government hospitals with the technology that the government has. Sometimes it imports technology also using government doctors also. So, again, a classic case of a public good is light from the lighthouse. So, how does that happen? So, who are the recipients of that service and who actually puts that lighthouse in place? So, these are the things we have to keep thinking. And if we just take ourselves a couple of years back into the COVID, we will understand and appreciate what the government has actually done for us. That includes 200 crore vaccines administered to all of the Indians. So, we move on to this section on why the public sector is needed. So, why can't the economy just be allowed to operate on its own? So, in economics, there is something called the work of the invisible hand, which Adam Smith stresses that every person based on his or her self-interest is going to be working in such a way that the economy continues to move on. So, why is government direction even needed? So, to answer this, we have something called the market mechanism. The market, the essential creature that it is only concerned itself with profit making. The market does not concern itself with the number of homeless people, whether people are fed on the streets or not, whether schools are being built, whether libraries are present, whether open spaces are there for people, and those questions which involve people's welfare is none of the private sector's consideration. So, in reality, a paternalistic hand of the government is needed in order to deliver the welfare activities to the people. So, the market mechanism on one hand also has certain very rigid assumptions in place. For example, we think about free entry and exit, consumers and producers have full knowledge, there is free movement of factors of production and things like that. But in reality, what we actually see is imperfect competition. Perfect competition on one side, in reality we have market imperfections. We have the oligopoly market, we have monopoly, and we have a whole host of other structures which operate, and we need the government to regulate this system. Next, moving on, the private system thrives because there is an entity which ensures that the contractual arrangements and exchanges and obligations are actually taken care of or respected. Therefore, the entity which actually puts together the system by which the private sector can thrive is the government. So, that is yet another justification for the government sector to be present. Next one is the nature of public goods is such that you require a central administration of the same. For example, Let's take the case of national defense. National defense is something that can be administered best by the center, right? So, and for example, environment cleanliness and fresh air, light from lighthouses. So, these are the classic examples of public goods, and it is not possible for private sector to even conceive of the need for these things, let alone delivering it. So, the government sector again becomes important in this case. Next one, there is the problem of externalities that come in. So, externalities arise when the price mechanism fails or the price mechanism cannot capture the entire essence. So, market externalities can exist when there is discrimination in the economy, where there is a paradox of plenty, and when there are certain elements that need to be controlled there. So, in that case also you need the public sector in the picture. So, again, a society is inherently unequal. So, there are haves on the one hand and there are have-nots on the other. So, there has to be a link where you bridge the gap between the two. So, that is where distribution or redistribution comes into the picture. Again, there, in order to do that, we need the public sector. Again, in the system, in the general economic system, there is the presence of asymmetry of information. Asymmetry of information can happen from the buyer's side or from the seller's side. In each cases, the other party stands to lose if the government is not there. The government as an entity enters and the government actually sets right the asymmetry of information by bringing out bulletins and bringing knowledge to the people on the other side. So, this justifies the role, the existence of public sector in the economy. So, now what do we actually mean by public financial administration? So, public financial administration is the field of study which deals with government activities. It deals with how the government is going to finance its activities, whether it is going to raise taxes or whether it is going to borrow, or how exactly things are going to be financed is going to be seen by the public financial management. So again, the classic case of economics is you have scarce resources and you have unlimited, you have a zillion wants. So, how is this going to be apportioned between the two? So, scarce resources have to be optimally utilized in order to ensure that people, the well-being of the citizens are taken care of. Again, the study of that is also public financial management. So, an important objective in this case is to understand the impact of government expenditures, regulations, taxes, borrowings, how it hits people like you and me. So, that is the crux of public financial administration. So, in this course we are going to deal with the mixed economic system. So, again in this case ideally you should have a question, why are we even dealing with the private sector and when we are in a class of public financial administration? So, the reason for having this is that the private sector is a very important entity when we are talking about the government. Let us say, for example, the government comes up with a policy that says on every Wednesday, people who wear a checked shirt, right, or any checked dress is going to get an incentive. So, you mean to say people like you and me are not going to react to it? We will. So, any policy that is announced by the public sector has a definite implication on the way we organize ourselves. We as in the private sector organize ourselves and go about our usual business. So, how the private sector reacts to policy and how the private sector would behave if there is no policy in place is something that is an important part of the mixed economic system. So, therefore, we will also be looking at the public sector, its policies and its implications on the private sector. So, when we look at the functioning of the mixed economy, we do see the classic definition of a mixed economy is that you have the coexistence of the public and the private sector. So, what does it really mean? So, governments purchase outputs of business firms, they get into the business activity, they act like any other actor. They buy paper, they buy people's services and things like that. So, to pay for them, the government requires businesses and households to make various kinds of payments such as taxes, charges, fees and all that. So, a circular flow actually happens when the government comes into the picture. So, when we look at the functioning of this is a diagram which classically is both a two-sector model and a three sector model. The first model that you see, the small one, where you have the households and the firms alone, is a two sector economy, and you have the households and you have just the two entities here. So you do see that firms give their households give their services to the firms, and they get remuneration in terms of factor remuneration, and whatever the households make, that a part of it goes to the product market to buy goods and goods, and the other one, their savings, goes through the capital market. Again, this comes back to the firms, so therefore the loop is actually closed. Now, if the government comes into the picture, the situation gets a little more complicated. So in this model, it is important to understand that we are going to disregard business saving, and we are also going to ignore the foreign sector. While the foreign sector is very important, for this model, we are actually going to disregard that. So now when we get the government sector into the picture, we do see that the households, the government budget, the government buys the factors from the households also. They make a payment to the household sector, they buy products from the firms, and they make a payment to the firms also, which is the remuneration for the goods that they receive from the firms. And another important thing we need to understand is there are transfer payments that are made also. So transfer payments are those payments that are made where there is no consideration of a good and a service. It is just a payment that is made for as in welfare measures, for example pension, for example scholarships, and anything like that. They will be the transfer payments that will be made from the government to the household sector. So with this entire loop of the three sector model actually can be completed. So this brings in the element of importance of the government sector in the general scheme of things. Now if we go to the major functions of the public policy, the major functions of the public policy are four. One is the allocation function, the next one is the distribution function, the stabilization function, and the coordination of the budget function. We will move on with the first one, which is allocation function. So the provision for social goods, or the process by which total resource use is divided between the private and the social goods, is what is actually known as the allocation function. So let us just imagine that we have a certain scarce resources in use. So the government first has to decide how much is going to be given to the private sector and how much is going to be taxed and taken back by the sector again. So that's one. And again, when it decides to go about allocating goods, the government also has to decide whether we are going to make more of Chandrayans, or whether we are going to make more of build more of roads, or whether we are going to build more of Vande Bharats. It's definitely not going to be all of it, because the resources are inherently scarce. So the government has to decide which way it is actually going to go. So the crux of this entire thesis is that if there is going to be more of one, it definitely comes with the reduction in the other. So there is going to be an opportunity cost of making one versus the other. So this is the crux of the allocation function. So when we discuss allocation function, we have to look at an entire family of goods, which are the public goods. The public goods are those goods which are slightly different from the normal goods that we are so used to going and buying in the market. So for example, we want to buy a packet of chips, or it's hot and you want to go for a cool drink or whatever. So that good typically, or maybe a dress or anything, that is a private good. So, and you pay a price for it and you buy it. So when you buy that good, you are actually telling the shopkeeper or the seller that I am okay with the price, and you are going to pick it up, and that good becomes entirely yours, and you are the owner of that good. And once you have picked the dress or a packet of chips, there it is not left for the other person to consume the very same commodity, right? So it is private in use. And what is the consideration for exchange here? It is price, or the market mechanism comes into the picture. What if I were to tell you there is a family of goods out there where the consideration is not price, but there is some criteria, a non-price criteria, which is there in the picture, where I get to consume the good, but you can consume it too. So there is non-rivalry in consumption of a public good. For example, there is a beach and the air is very salubrious. I want to go and enjoy the beach. It does not prevent you from enjoying the same, isn't it? So, this is a classic case of a public good. So, if we will see, public good or a social good is a collective good. So, Samuelson in the year 1954 says, a public good is a good which all enjoy in common, in the sense that one's individual consumption is not going to take away or not going to subtract anybody else's consumption of the same. So, each of us, you and I, or all of us together, consume all of the good. So, that is one part. So, this is the non-rival part of the public good. So, again, when we go into the characteristics of public goods, we do see that you cannot withhold anybody from enjoying a pure public good. So, we arrive at an important point called non-excludability. For example, in certain places when there is a flood or when there is an earthquake or anything, the army are deployed. So, the Indian army is not going to say, no, we will not take you in the boat, or we will not give services to you. No, the Indian army is here to protect all of us Indians, isn't it? So, in that case, it's a classic case of non-excludable services that the government gives, that the public good that is handed over to us. So, here the point we need to understand is that these are not sold in the market, they are made available by the government. So, how do we understand how the goods are made available to us? The goods are made available not through the price mechanism, but through the ballot. And this is where you actually get to see the closeness of the political process and the economic process. So, when we go to the ballot, we have political parties that actually come to us once in 5 years and tell us, see, this is the list of goods and services we will be giving it if we are elected. So, as voters, we will vote for that list of goods and services which come closest to our utility. So, we pick them in place, right? So, it is roundabout, it is not direct, and it is not rationed through the price, it is rationed through non-market rationing. So, the criteria could be that women people get to ride a certain bus, or people from certain communities get to have reservations for certain types of colleges or something, or anything. So, the criteria, or people who belong to hilly areas or islanders get preference over other common public. So, it can be any criteria, but the criteria is not just price. Yes. So, this is one of the characteristics of public good. So, non-rivalry and non-excludability are two important features of a public good. So, there are two features here. You can have high and low on both of this. So, if you are going to plot these two against one on the x-axis and one on the y-axis, you have rivalry on the x-axis plotted here, and you have excludability on the y-axis. So, you will arrive at 4 quadrants, where the bottom left quadrant actually speaks about low rivalry, low excludability, and the top right quadrant talks about high rivalry, high excludability. It is the classic case of a private good. The bottom left is the classic case of a pure public good. There are two other things here which are a combination. So, the bottom right speaks about high rivalry, low excludability, and the top left quadrant speaks about low rivalry and high excludability. So, between these two, this continuum of a pure public good and a pure private good, you have several combinations of these two. Yes. So, when there are here, we can see certain examples of this. A classic case of a pure public good is national defense, clean air, clean environment, lights coming from the lighthouse, the calculus, the formulas that are available to all of us. You can use it, I can use it, anything. So, high rivalry, a pure private good is something that all of us know. It is doctor services, lawyer services. If I book a dentist from 6:30 to 7, you cannot have the same dentist services at the same time, maybe before or after, but at that time I block that person, right. So, this is a pure private good, and these other two are different combinations of rivalry and excludability. Now, moving on, there is yet another good we have to understand here, which is a merit good. A merit good by definition is under-consumed in the economy. It is under-consumed, therefore, it is much needed for the society to consume it. So, the merit good is essentially underconsumed and therefore underproduced in a free market economy. So, why is a merit good important is because it creates a certain positive externality coming from a merit good. Let's take the case of primary education, right? So, free primary education which the government gives. The intended purpose of a free primary education is that children actually young children get to go to school, fair enough. But what the society also enjoys on account of the children going to school is that there is a huge drop in child delinquency, and child thefts and pickpockets and other things are actually reduced, and the society is much more better. So, but there is underconsumption of it. Why this happens? We have heard of many cases where the parents actually send their little children to for work. That a reason this happens is that people inherently are myopic in their view. They do not see it from a far-sighted view. So, they do see that if the child goes to work today, it brings them some money. But in the long term, if the child were to go to school and were to get an education and were to go to college, the child would be making much more when he or she grows up. But this myopic view is something that people, being people that they are unable to see, which the government on account of its paternalistic view can actually see. So, again, healthcare, the inoculations that we got on account of COVID and general inoculations that children, little children get, all these are classic examples of a merit good. So, a merit good can also be eating more fruits and vegetables. There are some general examples of a merit good. Education at all levels, provision of food stamps to support nutrition, subsidized housing where the government actually thinks every person in India should have a house of their own, and the provision of parks and other recreational facilities where people actually enjoy open spaces and they are healthy and things like that, and picking up of trash so that mosquito doesn't breed. All these are classic example of merit goods. Now, in merit goods, there is an important point. There is the paternalistic view of the government. The next one is there is also the social norms that come into play. Social norms are highly subjective by their very character. Every government will have a list of do's and don'ts. There are certain community values that are associated with merit goods. For example, smoking, while it can be an economically important activity, because there is employment and there are people who buy it, there are consumers, suppliers and everything. Even today in India, smoking is something that is frowned down on in several societies, in most societies actually. So, the community values play an important part when it comes to merit goods. So, these things, it is impossible for the private sector to provide merit goods, to provide social goods and to take care of the welfare of the people. Therefore, the allocation function is something that the government has to do. So, all government policies have an effect on allocation of resources. In other words, the mix of goods produced in an economy is altered as a result of government policy. So, again, as I was saying, if there is going to be more of one good that is produced, if there is more impetus on aviation, probably there is going to be less on something else. If there are more libraries and education that is being built, probably there is going to be lesser focus on healthcare. And when during COVID there was so much focus on healthcare, probably the education sector took a little beating. We don't know. Only statistics can tell us. Now, how the government policy operates and what is the effect on the private sector, on people like you and me, is definitely something that merits a lot of understanding. The next one we are going to see here, again, when you talk about allocations, an important point that we have to understand here is it is done through non-market rationing. So, price is not the only criteria here. You have several criteria like income, age, family status, whether you belong to a certain community, payment of certain taxes. If you have to use a toll road, then in that case maybe you will have to pay something. If you are availing of a benefit, that is something, fees, charges. If you want a birth certificate, you have to pay an amount. So, here it is not, price is not the only criteria. Yes. So, we move on to a concept of local and social goods. So, here spatially limited goods are, the spatial limitation is important. For example, the local government is best suited to take care of the local needs like trash pickup and street lights and better pavement of roads and things like that. while the central government is much better in dealing with national defense and taking care of the country's sovereignty and other things. So, we move on to the next function of public policy, which is the distribution function. The distribution function is actually one of the most contentious of functions that we get to see. So, when there is a policy, the important question is, who are the winners and who are the losers? There cannot be an answer that the nation wins eventually. Well, fine, but if especially we are on somebody who are on the losing side, we won't be happy, absolutely, isn't it? So, it cannot be that everybody gets to lose or everybody gets to win. So, there are clearly certain people or certain pockets which are winning and certain pockets which are not winning. In this case, you can have intended consequence of a public policy and certain unintended consequences of public policy. For example, intended consequences are when you are pulling out income from the higher income bracket people and redistributing it, it's an intended effect. When we are talking about an aviation program and a little bit of wildlife here and there being damaged, some doves being damaged or anything, it's an unintended consequence of that. So, again, the distribution function is contentious because the losers are not going to be happy about having to give up on something that they consider as important to them. So, here efficiency adjustments are important. So, costs must be provided, certain compensations have to be given to people. So, this becomes an important issue here. So, adjustments are definitely needed in the society. At this stage, we have to acknowledge that adjustments have to happen in the society. So, how should income be distributed? So, if somebody A is winning at the expense of B and C, the group that is winning has to compensate B and C. So, again, this has a clear indication on how the tax structure in the economy should be designed. So, this is essentially the distribution function. The third one is the stabilization function. Stabilization function has basically to do with the macro principles, the primary macroeconomic objectives of high levels of employment that have to be maintained in the economy, reasonable level of price stability. Nobody wants a super inflated economy at all. Soundness of foreign accounts, we need robust foreign accounts, an acceptable rate of economic growth, and we need to protect the environment as well. So, in order to take care of all this, the government needs direction. So, the government at a higher level needs to understand how the economy is going to be steered towards what it considers as important. So, in this case, why is there a need for stabilization policy? If you can see this chart, you will see that the spending decisions of the millions of people are taken into account. So, that is going to affect the level of aggregate demand in the economy. The level of aggregate demand in the economy has a direct bearing on income and employment in the economy, right? So, this is the need for stabilization policy. And when we do talk about stabilization policy, there are two routes the government can take. One is the monetary policy and one is the fiscal policy. So, when it comes to the monetary policy, we are talking about tweaking the interest rates, working at the money supply and money demand. So, this can happen by means of discount rates, open market policy, moral suasion and the credit requirements, everything by the RBI. So, who takes care of the monetary side of stabilization is the Reserve Bank of India or the Central Monetary Authority that takes care of it. The fiscal instruments primarily are how the government actually works with taxes and subsidies. So, it is important to take care of on the one hand you have a bouquet of taxes that can be levied and you have subsidies that can be taken, that can be given to the needy people, and the next one is about government expenditure, where the government will enter, it will spend, whether more number of IITs will be made, AIMs will be made, or those decisions are going to be done by the government. The fourth and final function is coordination of the budget function. So, this is a very, very important thing. So, this function actually runs all across the other three functions of public policy. So, a budget is an important document of receipts and expenditure that is drawn every year by the government at all levels. The central government has a budget, the states have a budget, and the local authorities have a budget as well. So, this one is so important that the entire planning for the year, every single program that is going to be administered, what is going to be allocated to the people, how taxes are going to be levied on people, how things are going to be redistributed, where the economy is going to go in terms of stabilization, what is the rate of growth that is needed. Everything actually emanates from this sacrosanct document, which is the budget document, and this is the budget function. A lot of this in this course is a lot of material is actually reserved for the budget. Hence, I will just give you a little gist of it and I will stop there. The next one, we will to just go over this entirely. What we have covered in this is that we have seen what the public sector is, why we need a public sector in the first place. So, and we see that when we talk about public sector, it is not just public sector, it is the mixed economy. We talk about the public sector and the private sector as well. We talk about the 4 functions of public policy, which is the allocation, distribution, stabilization and the coordination of the public function, the budget. So, with this I would like to end this class, and if there are any questions, I will be happy to take them in the right channel. Thank you so much.